Well, welcome. We are so excited to have you all here with us today. My name is Betsy King, and I am the lead clinical educator for Hospice Corporation in the Macy Catheter, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to this very special webinar. I just want to go over a few logistics before I introduce our hosts, our guests today, and get started. If you are a nurse, you will be able to receive a continuing education credit for attending the webinar today. You will be receiving from us a course evaluation email. Be on the lookout for it. It'll be from Hospice Corporation. Once you complete the course evaluation and send it back, we will issue you your CE certificate via email. So be on the lookout for that, but that's what you'll need to do in order to get a continuing education credit. Unfortunately, our licensing only provides for us to provide CEs to nurses. So for the social workers and the chaplains out there, I'm very sorry, but we can't issue continuing education credits for you. I can give you a certificate of attendance if that would be helpful, though. You can just email that to me. So without any further ado, I want to first and foremost welcome any veterans or family members of veterans that are joining us today. And thank you so much for your service and wish you a very happy Veterans Day. As luck would have it, we are so blessed today to have two pioneers in veterans hospice care with us. Both the president and the vice president of the board of Opus Peace will be presenting our webinar today. And I'm going to turn it over to them right now and let them introduce themselves without any further ado. Leann, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Betsy. And it's an honor to be here, especially on Veterans Day. For those of you who may not know, Opus Peace was started by 5 VA hospice nurses who took care of over 10,000 dying veterans. So it's a great day to be here presenting on their behalf. My name is Leann Thrapp, and I'm Vice President of Clinical Services at EveryStep in Des Moines, Iowa, and I'm super glad to be here. So thank you for your time. Angie?
Thanks, Leann. And thank you, Betsy, and to everyone at Hospice Corps. We appreciate you welcoming us as guest speakers today. I too would echo what Leann said and what Betsy said about honoring and appreciating all of our veterans, not just today, but every day. I am Angie Snyder, and I am a nurse by background. I work for BAYADA Home Health Care, and we are very excited to share with you some tools for caregivers for your well-being, as we all have been experiencing this pandemic, and aside from that, just everyday chaos and distress in our life. So we're going to start by learning some basics about how the brain works and what it needs. This will help you better know how to use your brain as your ally. So having a basic understanding of the imprint that acute and chronic trauma leave on your brain and your body will allow you to modify your habits that are not supporting your well-being. The best way to do that is to learn some basics about post-traumatic stress disorder and secondary traumatic stress disorder. We're going to start by showing you a slideshow that helps all of us validate the impact that the pandemic has had on us.
Sometimes I'm in pain and I try to explain how I feel. tell you what I'm feeling. It's my soul that I'm revealing. So I don't need a lecture or a plan. I need a witness. Please don't run away when I'm trying to say what's inside. I need you to hear me loudly and clearly. Don't hide. When I'm filled with worry, I don't need a jury of my peers. I just need a shoulder, someone to hold me and hear. I need a witness, just need you to listen while I open up my heart. I need to tell you what I'm feeling. It's my soul that I'm revealing. So I don't need a lecture or a plan. I need a witness. I need a witness. I need a witness. Oh, I need a
The pandemic has changed all our lives. Just as our parents and our grandparents talked about the Great Depression, world wars, or the civil rights movement, we will talk about the pandemic and the long-lasting hardships it has caused. For many, the hardships have been traumatic. This book that you see on your screen, The Body Keeps the Score, forms the basis for what we're going to talk about. It's research-based, comprehensive, and includes holistic interventions. It is written by Bessel van der Kolk, who was a physician psychiatrist who devoted his career to responding to people who had been traumatized. He has the Center for Trauma in Boston and is considered by many to be one of the leading experts and authorities in post-traumatic stress disorder and techniques for rewiring the brain. This idea that the body keeps the score is not new. Think about lie detector tests. The whole basis for the lie detector is that you can say one thing, but if it's not true, the lie will register in your body. Or think about verbal and nonverbal communication. It is well known that if verbal messages don't match the nonverbal messages, the body language is more likely telling the truth. Prior to the 1990s, the brain was not studied like other organs. But new tools have opened the door to understand the brain. And evidence-based practice is now possible in ways unlike before. The good news is current brain research is changing the way we treat stress. Imaging technology now gives us the means to track how acute and chronic stress change the brain. EEG waves in the non-traumatized brain are fast in that frontal lobe to keep the person engaged in the environment and in relationships. And it's slow back here in the lower part of the brain where the amygdala is, which should be resting except during danger. Now, in the post-trauma brain, those EEG waves are reversed. The frontal brain waves are slow, so it's hard for that person to engage in people and situations and to be in the present moment around them. And the brain waves are fast in the lower brain because the brain is attuned to internal states of arousal. Gene markers have shown us some genes are turned off by trauma and other genes are turned on. And we now know that nerve pathways are changed, causing some parts of the brain to shut down and go offline, becoming non-functional. We know now how to coax the stressed out brain into new patterns. This is known as neuroplasticity. In other words, the brain can be changed so that that fear-based fight, flight, freeze brain doesn't have to stay in the on mode, secreting adrenaline and cortisol all the time. These research findings are very popular. You can hardly turn on PBS, Dr. Phil, or Dr. Oz without learning how the brain works and how you can change the brain. Now, you may think that you only have one brain, but you actually have three. We have a primitive survival brain, which acts instinctively. The primitive brain is active at birth. Think about a baby's brain, which regulates what it needs to survive: eating, breathing, heart rate, peeing, pooping. The next part of the brain to develop is this emotional brain or limbic system, and this registers emotions. It also surveys the environment for danger. It maps the world as good, bad, or neutral, with a bias always towards the negative. And like the primitive brain, it's also geared towards survival. This is the part of the brain where trauma imprints. The rational brain is the last layer of the human brain to develop. This frontal cortex allows us to bond to and to relate to others. It's the logical part of the brain that reflects and analyzes and does problem solving. Maturation of our brain continues through all three stages until it's fully developed in our mid-20s. So does anybody out there have teenagers at home like me? Do they sometimes make bad decisions? Yes, and there's a reason for that. Their brain is not yet matured to make rational decisions. Their brain is still in the live for the moment mode. So let's talk about how these three parts of the brain impact your life. Bessel van der Kolk says that fear is the basis for our survival. So look at this picture. If a cheetah is chasing you, it's important that you recognize the danger and escape, or you'll be eaten alive. Adrenaline is what helps you escape. Then there's also this resting at ease relaxation nervous system that is mediated by a chemical called acetylcholine. It says, hey, there's no cheetahs around, just relax, chill out. Our nerves have gaps where one nerve stops and the next one starts. It's chemicals that carry the messages from one nerve to the next. So when both acetylcholine and adrenaline are present in the gap between the nerves, which chemical do you think takes precedence? Right, it's adrenaline. You could have a huge amount of acetylcholine and a little tiny bit of adrenaline. And just like that, adrenaline takes over. We call that an adrenaline rush. Now, why is this? It's because the basis for survival is stay away from danger. I want you to think about the impact of these nerve chemicals. When adrenaline and cortisol are present, how easy do you think it is to sleep? And nightmares are common. I've had nightmares, you've had nightmares, but the nightmares that combat vets and people with PTSD have are unlike any nightmares I have had. And then the fear of nightmares makes sleep the enemy. So the person doesn't want to go to sleep. Van der Kolk says that when faced with good and bad stimuli, the brain will automatically choose the bad because survival takes precedence. And we might get flustered in these situations. Why? Because the brain scans show that those higher parts of the brain go offline. And that's the reason after a trauma is over, the person often says things like, gosh, I lost my senses. Or I don't know what I was thinking. Why did I do this? And why didn't I do this instead? Again, under stress, the frontal cortex with its rational thinking goes offline. Now, hopefully you're not chased by a cheetah very often, but there are cheetahs in your life. It might be an angry parent, a boss, a spouse, or a car wreck, a chronic illness, or unrelenting stress in your workplace. Your body will respond the same, whether it's an actual cheetah or an angry parent, an accident, or an illness. Anytime you feel threatened, adrenaline will kick in to alert you to possible danger. And it does that from a very specific part of the brain. In our midbrain, there's a special part of the brain whose job it is to keep us safe, to keep us from danger. It registers threats and it makes sure that those threats get imprinted so that even anticipated threats won't harm us. This part of the brain is called the amygdala, and it activates automatically without your conscious control. It causes that fight, flight, freeze when perceived threats arise. People get triggered. In the literature, this is called the amygdala hijack. It's as if the amygdala has hijacked the brain and says, stop what you're doing and do what I want you to do. And when this happens, that rational frontal cortex loses its ability to turn the amygdala off. And if that amygdala stays in the on position most of the time, symptoms of PTSD often develop. The amygdala is more powerful than willpower. So you can say, calm down, get over it, but it's too late. Adrenaline and cortisol are already circulating in your body. However, we now know that there are ways to develop a better relationship with the amygdala so it loses its power to hijack. And Bessel van der Kolk says the way to do this is through toning down the amygdala by helping it know that the body is safe.
Now, it's easy to see how the brain is changed after an acute traumatic event. For example, it's easy to see how people who go to war come back changed. They come back not the same person. In fact, they might even define themselves as their pre-war self versus their post-war self. But what you may not realize is that trauma can be acquired gradually. And what's important for you to know is that whether your brain learns to respond to trauma suddenly or gradually, the endpoint is often the same, and the outcome often looks the same. So in other words, chronic, unrelenting stress can accumulate, coalescing into a force that turns the distress switch to that on position that Angie talked about, just like sudden trauma does. So no matter if you acquire trauma suddenly or slowly, the result is your brain is changed after trauma. You stop being curious about the world, and instead you become scared of it. You become wary of any further demands on your life. You lose your self-confidence. Your imagination is blunted You can't even imagine a new future for yourself. And this can lead to a sense of hopelessness. If you are feeling burned out, or if you are suffering from compassion fatigue, you may be able to relate to some of these outcomes. And if you can, you may be experiencing what the literature calls secondary traumatic stress disorder. Now let's talk about caregiver distress now. Let's relate this stress to the stress of a job that can insidiously deactivate our me brain. And that can rob us of self-compassion until we have secondary traumatic stress disorder. So let's look at burnout. Now that's really more about problem solving and organizational policies and control. Examples of burnout include a dictatorial manager who yells and is condescending. Burnout might be caused by being inundated with so much paperwork that you can't get to the patient care. Compassion fatigue then started emerging in the literature in the 1990s and started being distinguished from burnout and identified as a separate entity, independent from job expectations and organizational structures like we see in burnout. Compassion fatigue is described as this weariness that can arise from extending care to suffering people. And let's look at secondary traumatic stress disorder then. In the 2000s, we started seeing secondary traumatic stress emerge because the signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue look very much like post-traumatic stress disorder. And researchers were finding that workers in high stress patient environments met this criteria. So compassion fatigue and secondary traumatic stress disorder are commonly used interchangeably because they relate to each other, with secondary traumatic stress emerging as the newer term. So I have a question for you. Do you witness loss, hardship, and death on a regular basis? Do you experience ongoing, unrelenting demands on your time that leaves you feeling drained and unfulfilled? What about this pandemic? Talk about loss and hardship and unrelenting demands, right? These stressors can be the source of distress, and your body reacts to these stressors whether you want it to or not. So the key is to develop an awareness about how your body is reacting. So let's look at the distress of being a caregiver. How many here want to be the perfect caregiver? I know I do. Do you know what that looks like? It looks like this. So here we are, be everywhere at once on skates. The perfect caregiver better be a hand holder. Document, document, document. Yep, we have to be fiscally responsible. Keep going on around, resource manager, you better believe it. Got to answer the phone. Toothpicks in the sleepy eyes because we worked extra. Got to have a big heart, right? Perpetual optimist. Government regulation assure, yes. The med dispenser, we do it all. Insurance, compliance, assure. Keep the environment on an even keel. Got to answer to your boss. Got to answer to your boss again. And don't forget, document, document, document before you leave the home, right? Goodness. In one research study, 78% of hospice nurses surveyed experienced signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder or secondary traumatic stress disorder. And you can see on the screen some of the most common symptoms. So this is no small matter, ladies and gentlemen. Let's look at helping, fixing, and serving. This represents 3 different ways of seeing life. Rachel Naomi Raymond says it's a matter of perspective. Rachel says, when you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see life as broken. But when you serve, you see life as whole. And she says, fixing and helping may be the work of the ego, and service the work of the soul. Which one of these perspectives is your perspective? If you become aware, you might discover that you adopt all 3. In other words, in certain situations and with certain people, you tend to help. And in others, you tend to be the fixer. And still others, you move and transition into serving. And as Raymond defines service, when we can serve rather than help or fix, then we are dwelling from our soul, from our being, versus our ego. So this book of poetry was written by women who served in Vietnam and suffered post-traumatic stress disorder in the aftermath of that war. They used poetry and the arts to recover. I want to read to you one poem. Hello, David. My name is Dusty. I am your night nurse. I will hang more blood. I will give you something for your pain. I will stay with you and I will touch your face. Yes, of course, I will write your mother and tell her you were brave. I will write your mother and tell her how much you loved her. I will write your mother and tell her to give your bratty kid sister a big kiss and hug. I will stay with you and I will hold your hand. I will stay with you and watch your life flow through my fingers into my soul. I will stay with you until you stay with me. Goodbye, David. My name is Dusty. I am the last person you will see. I am the last person you will touch. I am the last person who will love you. So long, David. My name is Dusty. David, who will give me something for my pain. Now we chose this poem for the last few lines. I am the last person you will see. I am the last person you will touch. Many of you may work in geriatrics and healthcare settings where you are the last person that a patient sees or touches. That is an awesome responsibility to hold in your hands. And that last line, who will give me something for my pain? If you work in hospice or a funeral home or the emergency room or the intensive care or a nursing home, do trauma counseling, you are surrounded by stress and death and pain and grieving families and families in shock and angry families, and the list goes on and on and on. That impacts you. That causes the release of stress chemicals that Angie talked about. Stress chemicals put you on high alert, take you out of being grounded in your body, and often cause you to numb out and disconnect from you. So the question becomes, what do you do with your pain? Do you know what you do with your pain? Where does your pain go when you shut it out? When you push it down? Think about that for a moment. This is an important question for you to be able to answer? Or is your reality that you take care of every single sick patient or grieving family or traumatized client and then go right to the next and the next and the next? Because we contend that the distress is not so much about the loss and the hurt and the grief that you are exposed to. It's that there is no time, no space, or no method to release the loss and the hurt and the grief. So many of you may be familiar with the research that Dale Larson has done, studying burnout and compassion fatigue, as well as secondary stress in caregivers. The research results has led Dr. Larson to define caregiver distress as becoming demoralized from wanting to do good work, but not being able to do so. He says this leads to frustration and decreased caring. Think about the impact of the pandemic on healthcare workers, on you. The heartbreak of not being able to care for patients in the way that you need to has caused many caregivers to feel anxious, alone, and incredibly frustrated. I've heard heartbreaking stories from my own team who have had to watch patients go to surgery alone, go through rehab alone, and die alone. This ongoing heartbreak has broken many, many, many caring professionals, and they've had to sit back and watch helplessly. This kind of unmourned loss and hurt deadens the spirit of healthcare professionals. So think about the stress of all the competing losses and competing interests pulling us in different directions every day. We have the demands from our family, our employer, insurance companies, government regulators. The pandemic has also magnified all of these demands, right? Our current healthcare system is a fractured system. That's all there is to it. And caregivers, be it personal or professional, get caught in the middle. And this leaves the caregiver's soul bankrupt, unable to deliver the care the patient needs and that the caregiver wants to provide. And that, my friends, is the definition of compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress disorder. So remember, Bessel van der Kolk says that the way to respond to this stress is to learn how to tone down that amygdala by helping it know that the body is safe. That starts with acknowledging and validating the losses that are causing our distress. So let's look at some of the losses that you've sustained from this pandemic. Oh my goodness, look at the losses. I want you to take a look at this and see how many you've suffered. Loss of team spirit, loss of choice over COVID test or no test, loss of watching coworkers get laid off. Now, any of these losses by themselves may not be that distressful, but small losses can accumulate. Small losses can coalesce into where the amygdala hijack and where you find yourself completely derailed and dispirited. All losses are not equal. The impact of a loss is magnified when we are helpless to change or control what is happening to you. Most of the pandemic losses go beyond our control, don't they? And when we can't control something or someone, we feel vulnerable. Our defenses go up. We use our favorite numbing behaviors to try to not feel our helplessness. But there's good news. Just being able to recognize helplessness, to name it, and to talk about it. And most importantly, let yourself feel it down here in your gut. That can be very empowering. It can help you sort out what you have control over and what you have no control over. So let's look at some numbing agents that we all use that keep us disconnected from the part of self-caring our pain. When I first saw this list, denial looked like it was 10 stories high. I can tell you that regrets often surface as people die. They look back over their life with a broader perspective and they see things they could have done differently. On their deathbeds, what do these issues usually surround? Yep, you've got it. Misuse of their numbing agents. Now, this is just a small list. There are lots more. What's important is that you know what numbing agents you use so that you can bring in awareness to the ways you are keeping yourself numb and unconscious. So what you'll find is that we all have tactics to camouflage our pain. Is camouflage important in untrustworthy situations and environments? Yes, it is. But what's the problem? We end up wearing camo at home with ourselves and with others who are trustworthy. Where does that lead? It leads to a passionless life. We end up selling our souls, so to speak. So I ask you, what is your favorite numbing agent? It's important that you know.
Let's talk about how to feel our helplessness rather than numbing it with anger or guilt or griping. Let me share with you how trauma therapists help people do that. This is a newspaper article that was in the Tampa Bay Times that chronicled how a counselor helps veterans with PTSD. The reporter interviewed both the counselor and a traumatized veteran named Lee. Here's what the newspaper article said. In his mind, Lee Prestonary kept circling the crash site. His friends were in the wreckage below, and he couldn't help. The memory brought him to tears. Seated across from him is a trauma expert watching his body language. She coached him using tools he had learned from her to unclench while remembering the pain. It allowed him to accept that there was nothing he could have done. So you can see how learning to unclench can be an antidote for helplessness. Bessel van der Kolk says that PTSD is mainly caused by helplessness. So let's learn how to unclench. The purpose of unclenching is to create an interior space whereby emotional pain and peace can sit side by side without fear. You will want to practice unclenching whenever you feel uptight, upset, or helpless. To do this means becoming better acquainted with that part of yourself that is holding your stress, your pain, and your hurt. It also means temporarily suspending those numbing behaviors that you may be using to disconnect you from that part of yourself. So even if it's only for a few moments, getting a glimpse of the part of you that is strong and capable of holding your emotional pain will help you reconnect with that part of yourself. Rather than letting that amygdala and that fear-based brain control you, it means learning how to make some different connections between the synapses of the nerves in your brain. This will help you re-own pieces of yourself that you may have lost or forgotten. It will help you to learn how to rehome these pieces by creating safe internal space. The result is that you can become revitalized with the energy of your deepest self. Again, doing this for just a few moments with practice will change the circuitry in your nervous system. So I'd like you to pick one little loss that you've experienced, and then in a minute, I'm going to ask you to recall that stressor. So think about something that might be a bit disappointing, not a big stressor. Maybe it's just the disappointment of taking time out of your busy schedule to be on this webinar today. Or maybe this morning your boss told you that you need to finish a report and hand it in by the end of the day, which is interrupting your whole schedule. These might be small stressors, but the loss of expectation, the loss of time, are still losses that need to be mourned. Otherwise, you stay stuck in how you wish things were, instead of being able to adjust to the present moment. So decide on one little loss that you've experienced, and we're going to use it for our next exercise. If you can, lower your eyes or close them completely so that you can turn away from the outside world and focus just a little bit more on your interior world. Take a few deep breaths, breathing in and out. Let yourself relax just a little bit more than you are right now. Unfurl your brow. Unclench your jaw. Imagine your neck and your shoulders just melting. Notice your heart beating quietly. Now scan your body down to your feet. Notice how there might be a space in your feet that feels open and free, yet feels grounded and secure. Let yourself take a few deep breaths, breathing in and breathing out, letting that breath go almost like a sigh of relief. Do that a few times at your own pace. Relax your breath now and let your body breathe however it wants to. Now, place one or both hands firmly over your heart. Tenderly anchor your heart with your support and strength. Pay attention to how your heart may be closed or numbed with fear of emotional pain. And just for a few moments, let yourself think about something that may be a little bit stressful. Not a big hurt. Maybe it's a disappointment. A loss that stings, but doesn't overwhelm. And just for this moment, let yourself feel that memory. The pain you are feeling is real. It is part of your experience. The pain is yours, but it is not you. It is not who you are. You can feel the pain that you have, but it doesn't define who you are. For just this moment, you can suspend your fear of pain and hurt by just letting yourself be curious about how it's affecting you. You do not need to be afraid of who you are or who you are not. Be aware of this part of you that has been strong enough to hold this pain for you. Breathe deeply this part of yourself. Know that this too is a part of who you are. As you prepare to slowly open your eyes, resolve to bring this part of you with you, knowing that this is the place inside you that is able to let pain and peace sit side by side without fear. So take a few deep breaths as you slowly open your eyes, bringing this sense of yourself with you as we proceed on through our time together.
So what would happen if instead of trying to not feel your pain or to not be human, you would learn how to forgive? Because at some point, changing your relationship to the pandemic losses that you've sustained involves forgiveness. I know. However, it is important to not forgive prematurely because that ends up becoming a false forgiveness, and that doesn't really work. So for now, it's enough to simply consider forgiveness, not only forgiving others, but also learning how to forgive yourself. Let's watch this video that will provide you with some clues for how to do it when the time is right.
What happened to my heart? What used to be so full of light has grown so dark. Shadows of resentments and all the hurts I've ever felt. I'm on my knees, I need some help. Give me strength, please help this dying heart to live. Grant me power, the power to forgive. What happened to the peace? I used to feel contentment deep inside of me. Now there's hate and anger eating at my soul. I've got to find a way to let it go. Give me strength, please help this dying heart to live. Grant me power, the power to forgive. I will not forget, but with forgiveness I just might find a way to let love in and heal my life. Give me strength, please help this dying heart to live. Grant me power, the power to forgive. Please help this dying grant me power to forgive. Help me forgive.
The power to forgive. Do you have the courage to forgive all of those losses the pandemic has forced upon you this last year or two? It starts with a decision that doesn't have to be made today, but a decision that needs to be made at some point in the future if you are going to bring peace to what has happened. Do you have the courage to forgive the betrayals you may have felt from other people, organizations, the government, maybe the company you work for? And just consider this. What happens if you choose to not forgive? I ask that you write down 1 or 2 people or events in your life that you need to consider forgiving. So, do you want to learn how to stay in your own skin, especially when you are anxious, angry, or upset? Well, we're going to show you this simple self-help tool that you might already do unconsciously when you get distressed. So let me explain what the body already knows. When you are calm and you are relaxed, your energy resides down here low and deep within your gut. You might report feeling open. You might feel grounded and very, very peaceful. But what happens when you're beside yourself? You feel very different. That's because anxious energy usually rises, doesn't it? Climbs from the depths of your belly up into your chest, your heart space. Your voice rises in pitch. Breathing becomes shallow and rapid, and you might report feeling uptight, flighty, and scattered. But you can access the innate body wisdom that you may not even realize you have. For example, have you ever received bad news and that caught yourself off guard? And maybe you gasped, catching your breath? Maybe you grabbed your chest with an open palm to steady yourself? Why do we gasp and grab our chest? Because unconsciously, you are anchoring yourself. You're keeping yourself grounded so you can stay in your own skin. The anchoring heart technique simply applies the same gesture consciously. It can be used when you are in need of strength, in need of courage, in need of patience. And not only that, you will want to anchor your heart to activate that feel-good chemicals in your body and keep your well-being pathways opened in our nervous system. And the way to do this is to simply anchor your heart and let yourself linger in the moment. That positive feeling, savor the beauty of it all. Behold the moment of inspiration, just taking goodness and beauty in. Now, the anchoring heart technique can be done anywhere and any time. Requires no extra space, no extra time, or no special equipment. It can be done with your eyes open. You can lower your eyes, or you can close your eyes altogether. It can be done using one hand or both hands. The more you use it, the more effective it becomes. And your nervous system learns to connect this gesture with grounding and safety. That's the goal. There are 3 simple steps. First, and do this with me, place one or both hands firmly and tenderly on your heart and breathe deeply. The second step will be to feel whatever it is you're feeling right now, even if it's an emotionally painful feeling. You will only be doing this for a few seconds. It's just making that mind-body connection. And the third step, to become curious about that place inside of you that is strong enough to hold your hurt and pain without being afraid of it. That's the good news. So now you have the self-help tool that can help you stay connected to this deeper part of self, and it's called the anchoring heart technique. It's not a magic bullet that immediately turns that amygdala off when there is a real threat, but it will start changing your overly sensitive amygdala. Just like with all habits, however, it takes practice. You must practice. Use the anchoring heart technique to keep yourself grounded in your skin. And you may be surprised how that brain of yours will start responding if you just work with it. You can even teach this self-help tool to others. Even in the midst of a distressing situation or crisis, you can still gently help someone anchor their heart. The only difference when teaching it to someone else who is already upset or triggered is rather than having them lower their eyes at the beginning, have them lower their eyes at the end, because closing their eyes at the beginning can be scary, especially if they're not sure yet what you're going to do. So now you can also do this as a group. We call that the collective anchoring heart. So consider starting meetings by pausing for 30 seconds to do the anchoring heart technique together with your team. It allows people to enter a meeting more calmly and connected to each other. Consider ending meetings with the anchoring heart technique to help people absorb what transpired. 30 seconds can make all the difference between the talk and the chatter that happens sometimes after the meeting versus integrating and incorporating and absorbing the information and being more at peace with whatever needs to be done after the meeting. So in summary, caregiver well-being has been impacted by the many, many losses and transitions that have occurred due to the pandemic. These impacts will linger long after the pandemic is over, and we will continue to adjust to a new state of normalcy. The 4 tools that we discussed today are simple. They're easy to do interventions to begin to mourn the losses and the hurts of the pandemic and to begin to restore your well-being. The success of these tools comes from using them. So as you move through your very, very busy day, take time to remember, acknowledge and validate the losses and the hurts. Think about that list of losses that we shared. Feel your helplessness, anxiety, sadness, anger, any feelings that's there. Don't numb them out. Consider forgiving what happened to you throughout this pandemic. And finally, use the anchoring heart technique. It works. Will help you stay grounded. In closing, I would like to ask that we all do a collective anchoring heart technique together. So place one or both of your hands over your heart. Lower your eyes or close them completely if you feel comfortable doing so. And take a few deep breaths and let yourself feel whatever you are feeling right now. Take one more deep breath as you slowly open your eyes. Thank you for your time today.
Leann and Angie, on behalf of all of us at Hospice Corporation, the hospices that we support, anyone who's able to join us today, my heartfelt thanks for what you've shared today. You've given us all so much to think about and many tools that will be very helpful in helping us all deal with the many losses that we've experienced through the pandemic. For those of you who are with us today and wish that your team had been on, or someone that you know had been on, or a loved one, I'm happy to share with you that this webinar has been recorded and it will be available on our website, which is macycatheter.com, early next week. So you will be able to log on and share the video with anyone or rewatch it yourself. So thank you again, Leann and Angie, and appreciate so much your sharing with us today.
Thank you.